This video shows the removal and installation of the GEnx fuel metering unit. It also illustrates the proper installation of the preformed packing seal and packing retainers onto the fuel metering unit fuel tubes. Always be sure to use the latest version of this aircraft maintenance manual task when performing this task. This digital training aid gives the technician visual help in performing this task. Warning: do not get fuel in your mouth, eyes, or on your skin. Do not breathe the fumes from the fuel. Wear goggles and gloves when using fuel. Keep fuel away from sparks, flame, and heat. Fuel is poisonous and flammable. Fuel can cause injuries to personnel and damage to equipment. Fuel metering unit removal. Do these steps to drain the fuel filter bowl. Put a 5 U.S. gallon, 19-liter fuel-resistant container below the fuel filter bowl. Remove the drain plug from the fuel filter bowl and let the fuel drain into the container. Remove and discard the preformed packing from the drain plug. Lubricate a new preformed packing with oil. Install the new preformed packing on the drain plug. Install and tighten the drain plug on the fuel filter bowl. Do these steps to drain the fuel supply system at the main fuel pump. Put the fuel-resistant container below the main fuel pump. Remove the 3 drain plugs from the main fuel pump. Let the fuel drain into the container. Remove and discard the preformed packings. Lubricate new preformed packing with clean oil. Place the new preformed packings on drain plugs. Install and tighten the drain plug on the main fuel pump. Do the following steps to drain the fuel metering unit, or FMU. Use soft jaw pliers to disconnect the electrical connectors from the FMU as follows. Put protective covers on the electrical connectors and the electrical receptacles on the FMU. Put the fuel-resistant container below the FMU. Remove the drain plug from the FMU. Let the fuel drain into the container. Remove and discard the preformed packing from the drain plug. Apply clean oil on the new preformed packing. Put the preformed packing on the drain plug. Install and tighten the drain plug on the FMU. Disconnect the VSV fuel manifold as follows. Remove the 5 bolts that attach the VSV fuel manifold to the FMU. Remove the bracket and gasket from the manifold. Note: you can reuse the gasket if it is not damaged. Inspect the gasket for damage following the AMM. Disconnect the VBV fuel manifold as follows. Remove the 5 bolts that attach the VBV fuel manifold to the FMU. Remove the gasket from the VBV manifold and inspect it for damage. Disconnect the TBV fuel manifold as follows. Remove the 5 bolts that attach the TBV fuel manifold and the support bracket to the FMU. Remove and inspect the gasket from the TBV fuel manifold. Remove 8 nuts and loosen 1 nut that attaches the FMU to the fuel adapter on the accessory gearbox as follows. Loosen the nut that is installed on the stud at the number 2 position, but do not remove it from the stud. Note: you leave the nut installed on the stud to make sure that the FMU stays on the studs when you install the removal tooling. Loosen and remove the remaining 8 nuts. Warning: be careful when moving the component. The component is heavy. Injuries can occur. Attach the line replaceable units fixture to the FMU as follows. Align the FMU cradle with the tool mounting points on the FMU. Install the 3 screws that attach the FMU to the cradle. Move the line replaceable unit hydraulic jack stand into position below the FMU. Raise and align the jack stand with the cradle. Install the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the LRU fixture. Apply a small amount of up pressure on the LRU fixture, cradle, and FMU. Remove the nut that is installed on the number 2 stud position. Use the applicable jack screws from the jack screw set to separate the FMU from the fuel adapter. Note, there are 2 holes for the installation of jack screws on the FMU mounting flange. There are also 2 guide pins to help keep the FMU in the correct alignment during removal and installation. Using the jack screws, carefully move the FMU away from the fuel adapter with the line replaceable units fixture. Note, make sure you keep a parallel gap between the FMU and the fuel adapter as you pull it away from the fuel adapter. Release the pressure on the line replaceable units fixture and lower the FMU. Move the line replaceable units fixture and the FMU away from the engine. Remove the jack screws from the jack screw holes on the flange of the FMU. Remove and discard the preformed packings and packing retainers from the FMU as follows. Remove and discard the preformed packing and the 2 packing retainers from each of the FMU's 6 transfer tubes. Install protective covers on the open ports of the FMU, the fuel manifolds, the fuel manifold tubes, and the open ports of the fuel adapter. Warning: be careful when moving the component. The component is heavy. Injuries can occur. Note, the FMU weighs 65 pounds or 29.5 kilograms. Remove the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the LRU stand. Remove the FMU and cradle from the LRU stand and place them on a table. Remove the cradle from the FMU. Fuel metering unit installation. Attach the FMU to the line replaceable units fixture as follows. Warning: be careful when moving the component. The component is heavy. Injuries can occur. Note, the FMU weighs 65 pounds or 29.5 kilograms. Put the FMU and cradle in position on the LRU jack stand. Install the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the LRU jack stand. Remove the protective covers from the fuel metering unit fuel tube and the fuel adapter ports. Wipe the fuel metering unit fuel tubes and the fuel adapter fuel ports with a clean cotton wiper. Make sure that the mounting area is clean and that there is no damage to the mounting area or mounting studs. Lubricate the threads of the mounting studs on the fuel adapter with clean oil. Install the new preformed packings and packing retainers on the fuel tubes of the FMU as follows. Note, this preformed packing seal and packing retainer task illustrates the correct technique to install the packing retainers. You must minimize the amount that you deform the preformed packing retainers when you install them on the fuel tubes. If you open or twist the retainers too much, you can damage the retainers. Some fuel system components use a combination of preformed packing retainers and preformed packing seals at high pressure fuel connections. There are 2 retainers used for each seal at these locations. Use only new preformed packing seals and preformed packing retainers when you install a component. There are two pre-formed packing retainers used for each pre-formed packing seal. The pre-formed packing seal is installed between the two pre-formed packing retainers. Lubricate the pre-formed packing seal and pre-formed packing retainers with clean engine oil. The following figures illustrate the correct technique to install the packing retainers. You must minimize the amount that you deform the pre-formed packing retainers when you install them on the fuel port tubes. If you open or twist the retainers too much, you can damage the retainers. Install the first pre-formed packing retainer in the groove on the fuel port tube. Install the pre-formed packing seal. Install the second pre-formed packing retainer. Inspect the scarf cuts on the pre-formed packing retainers as follows. Make sure that the scarf cut gap is not excessive. An excessive scarf cut gap is an indication that the pre-formed packing retainer has been permanently deformed or that the seal and retainer assembly is not correctly installed. If there is an excessive scarf cut gap caused by damage to the pre-formed packing retainer, replace the pre-formed packing retainer. Make sure that the scarf cuts on the pre-formed packing retainers are not aligned. If the scarf cuts are aligned, carefully turn one of the pre-formed packing retainers so the scarf cuts do not align. Position the FMU on the accessory gearbox fuel adapter as follows. Move the FMU into its position below the engine with the hydraulic jack. Apply pressure to the hydraulic jack and lift the FMU into its position in front of the fuel adapter on the accessory gearbox fuel adapter. Move the FMU to the fuel adapter mount pad with the hydraulic jack. Adjust the line replaceable units fixture to align the FMU with the mounting pad on the fuel adapter. Caution: align the FMU correctly with the accessory gearbox. If you do not keep the FMU correctly aligned, you can cause damage to the pre-formed packing. Fuel leaks can occur. Move the FMU onto the fuel adapter with a positive forward motion until the pre-formed packings are fully engaged in the fuel adapter and no further forward motion can be made by hand. Install 3 nuts in easy-to-access locations and tighten the nuts enough to maintain the forward pressure and to keep the pre-formed packings engaged. Remove the threaded knob and lower the line replaceable unit's jack stand and move it away from the engine. Disconnect the 3 screws and remove the cradle from the MFP. Install the remaining 6 nuts to attach the FMU to the fuel adapter. Tighten each of the 9 nuts 1/2 turn at a time until all nuts have evenly sealed the fuel metering unit mounting flange completely against the fuel adapter. Note, the step above will allow the FMU pre-formed packings to engage the fuel adapter correctly. In a crisscross pattern, tighten all 9 nuts. In a crisscross pattern, tighten all the 9 nuts to the final torque. Connect the TBV fuel manifold to the FMU as follows. Lightly lubricate a gasket with oil. Install the TBV fuel manifold, the support bracket, and the gasket to the FMU with the 5 bolts. Tighten and then torque the 5 bolts. Connect the VBV fuel manifold to the FMU as follows. Lightly lubricate a gasket with oil. Install the VBV fuel manifold and the gasket to the FMU with the 5 bolts. Tighten and then torque the 5 bolts. Connect the VSV fuel manifold to the FMU as follows. Lightly lubricate a gasket with oil. Install the VSV fuel manifold, the support bracket, and the gasket to the FMU with the 5 bolts. Tighten and then torque the 5 bolts. Caution: do not use pliers that have metal jaws to tighten the electrical connector. Damage to the electrical connector can occur. Remove the protective covers from the electrical connectors and the electrical receptacles on the FMU. Connect the electrical connectors to the FMU. Put the airplane back to its usual condition and perform any tests of the FMU shown in the power plant test reference table in the airplane maintenance manual.